Hello, my name is Rachel Hollis. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about the Children's Cancer Priority Setting Partnership. Supported by the James Lind Alliance, supported and funded by the Children's Cancer and Leukemia Group and the Little Princess Trust. Research activity is very often led by the particular interests of researchers or of industry bodies like pharmaceutical companies. A priority setting partnership brings together patients, families, and the professionals who care for them to find out what are the unanswered questions or the gaps in research in a particular area that are of most importance to them, and taking those results to researchers and those who fund research in order to influence the wider research agenda. The James Lind Alliance, or JLA, has a well-established methodology for this. It's supported by the NIHR, which meets their infrastructure costs, but they don't fund individual PSPs. This one is funded by CCLG and by the Little Princess Trust. There has been a previous PSP for teenagers and young adults with cancer, and I'll talk a bit about that as the presentation goes on. On the JLA's website, you can find lots of information about previous PSPs, a broad and intriguing list, some of them quite specific, from acne or Lyme disease, through to some much more general, medically not yet explained symptoms, or living with and beyond cancer. And you can find here all the information about the TYA PSP. You'll also find quite a nice video which sets out the well-established process of a PSP and all the stages that go alongside it. If you want to know more specifically about this particular PSP, so the Children's Cancer PSP, then the best place to go is to the CCLG website, and you'll find more information about all the things I'm going to talk about this afternoon there. So as I say, the JLA has a really clear process for a priority setting partnership that's described in their handbook, which you can find on their website. And each PSP works with a JLA advisor. They don't all have this rather fetching curled wig. That's James Lind himself. The PSP will set up a steering group, identify relevant stakeholder groups, and then begin to gather some of the uncertainties, the unanswered questions that there are in research in whichever topic area is under consideration. Gathering those unanswered questions, the next stage is then to look and see, well, have any of those questions been answered? Are there questions that people think are a gap in research, but actually the knowledge is there, but not well disseminated? Having identified the unanswered questions, then they're prioritised into a top 10, and those priorities are then disseminated and promoted to researchers and the funders of research. The Children's Cancer PSP set off on its work late in 2019 with the establishment of a steering committee, great steering group with 5 parent representatives, patient representative, and a range of professionals, largely from health, but a range of disciplines, so medicine, nursing, and allied health professionals, but also from education with a teacher, from voluntary sector organisations, and from social care. We have our JLA advisor and chair, Jonathan Gower, and then a great coordinating team with Professor Faith Gibson, Dr. Bob Phillips, and Susie Aldis. And they were all involved in the previous TYA PSP, which has been a huge benefit to our group because they could bring to us all the learning from that, which I'm sure made it a less painful process than the TYA PSP. So our first task was to agree the scope for the PSP, which we agreed as all types of cancer and cancer-like conditions, so conditions being treated like cancer, and cancer in children aged 0 to 15 years at additional diagnosis up to the 16th birthday. TYA PSP did include young people between the ages of 13 and 16, but had very few responses from that particular cohort. The responses were more from the older age group. So we agreed the Children's Cancer PSP should include those young people diagnosed before their 16th birthday, and that questions could be about any aspect of treatment, care or concern along that care pathway, from the time leading up to diagnosis through treatment, follow-up to survivorship or palliative and end-of-life care, and any number of different topic areas within that care pathway. We were able to identify a great group of partners to support the PSP, and that was both our charity partners from most of the charities involved in childhood cancer care, and professional association partners representing the different professions involved in care. The role of those partners is really to help with raising awareness of the PSP, disseminating information and encouraging people to take part in surveys or other activity related to the PSP. So the next stage was to gather together the uncertainties or unanswered questions from the perspective of parents, survivors and professionals. So we designed an online survey, took time to get that right, but also to decide when to open it, because you will see that given the timeline that we had just begun our work really when COVID hit, and we needed to find the right time to put the survey out when people, both professionals and families, would have capacity to respond to it. So survey opened just about a year ago in September 2020 and ran to very early in January this year. Our PSP partners helped raise awareness, and we had almost 500 people send in almost 1,300 questions. And you can see there that the majority of those came from parents and carers and from survivors, and a significant number from professionals too. I'm sure that many of you listening today will have responded, so thank you for doing so. For anyone who didn't or didn't know about it, there is still time to get involved when we get to the interim survey, and you'll hear a bit more about that later. So where are we now in that JLA process? Well, our initial survey, as I say, went out and we had the questions. Now, we then did have a lag in questions for children, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that shortly, but they will be integrated in the process as it goes through. We removed out of scope questions, and then we looked at how we combine some of that large number of questions together, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the question sorting shortly. And once the questions are summarised, then there is a process of evidence checking to see has the question already been answered. So once we have a list of unanswered questions, and we have that as a manageable number of questions, then a further survey will come out where we will be asking that same range of partners to vote for the most important questions. And you don't need to have been involved in the first survey to respond to this interim prioritisation survey, which will be out either late this year or I think more likely early next year. From the vote, we then will take the top 25 or so rated questions, and they will go into a workshop attended by parents, families, children and professionals. And from that top 25 or so, then there will be a ranking process which will bring us out to a top 10. These were the top 10 priorities for the TYA PSP, which you can find on the website and have also been published. Just a little bit more about the question sorting. The first stage of that was to remove questions which are out of scope. You remember I talked about the scope of our survey, and most the out of scope questions were either because somebody was over 16 years at the time of diagnosis, or because what was being asked really wasn't clear. Sometimes we just got a couple of words which didn't indicate what the question underlying that might be, or that the question is something that is not answerable by research. Now, these questions aren't lost. Some, for example, have shown a gap in information that people have available to them, and we're thinking with steering group members and CCLG about how we can respond to some of those questions which indicate a gap in information or coordination. So then the next stage was in small groups. The steering group have worked to summarise the questions, so to have a look at where pretty much the same question was being asked in slightly different ways, and we were able to bring the questions together into one summary question. And by doing that, then the number of questions came down to 214. That's still a large number to go out to people to rank in importance. The recommendation is we should be looking at about 60 or 70 questions for our interim survey. So we're going through another process of going back, looking to see if there are questions that can be brought together, or other ways of managing that so that we get to a manageable number of questions to go into the interim survey. That's 60 or 70, of which, as I say, 25 will then go into the workshop to then finally come out with our top 10. Just a sort of bit more information on how that summary process goes on. And this is an example taken from the TYA survey, where looking at what psychological support package could improve psychological well-being for teenagers is the final question. But underneath that, then there are a number of original raw questions. You can see those on the screen there. And they were submitted by health professionals, by patients, by parents and carers. So a significant number of different people who asked questions that fit underneath that broad researchable question of what sort of a support package could improve psychological well-being. Now, in terms of the patients for the TYA, that was young people 13 and over. And we were really determined in the children's cancer survey that we heard the voices of children. That's more difficult. It's been probably the most challenging but also interesting part of the work so far in a lot of ways. We've learned a lot about what didn't work, and hopefully we'll learn what does. We have a subgroup of the PSP with parents, a teacher and a play specialist working with Faith and Susie to develop separate surveys for children, making sure that their voices will be heard throughout that process, and surveys designed for different age groups. So there are 3 different surveys for very young children, for 8 to 12-year-olds, and for 13 to 15-year-olds. And each of the surveys also has an animation directed to that age group to explain what it's all about. These are some images taken from the 8 to 12-year-old survey. And the survey can be taken by children and young people who have cancer now or have been treated when they were younger, diagnosed before their 16th birthday, but also by children and young people who have or had a brother, sister or friend with cancer. And the surveys are housed on the CCLG's website. These are the animation, some images from the animation for the very young children. And for the 13 to 15-year-olds, we're using the JLA animation that I mentioned earlier. The surveys opened in September. They plan to close in November. Questions are coming in, which is great. 46 at the time that I recorded this presentation. And responses from children focus very much on their experience of treatment, the impact of cancer and its treatment on their lives, and the psychological impact and support. And we've had some responses from siblings too, which is great. You can find out more and find the links to the survey on the Children's Cancer section of the CCLG's website. And of course, we need your help with this whole process. So we'd love you to encourage children and young people to take the survey. And then please look out for the interim prioritisation survey when that appears, and please take part in that. Only remains for me to say thank you and to thank our amazing steering group, our coordinating team and JLA advisor, and of course the CCLG, and in particularly Ashley and Angela in supporting the work, and the Little Princess Trust for funding and so much more in the way of support. Any questions, do come along to the live Q&A, which follows this section of the conference. Thank you very much and good afternoon.